if I'm thinking about a student in Alabama, if they ought to learn computer programming, even if they're not going to move to California, I would say yes. I think that there are going to be good opportunities for someone who's willing to learn and sort of willing to just jump into an organization and solve problems. In the Barbie universe, as far as I understand it, and I mean, I saw the movie once, so I don't know if I was missing something. As far as I understand it, they kind of have everything they need, and they don't really need to work. Like the main character, I don't know if she has a career, right? And I think it's important to be open to experimentation and open to different rules for different areas. I mean, you could say that a pharmaceutical company needs a patent, but a tech company doesn't need a patent over like a next button.
So, Joy, thank you so much for agreeing to join me on the Inductive Economy. It's an absolute privilege to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So, Tyler Cowen recently released a generative book called Goat. So, did you have a chance to go through the book? What were your thoughts when you were going through it?
I am loving it. I've read about half of it so far, and I've jumped around a little bit. It's you'll learn a lot, but it's also really just an interesting read. And I've read the article or the chapter on Keynes, the one on Adam Smith. It's, I mean, if you like Tyler Cowen, you're going to really like this book. And if you've been hearing about him, but haven't, been following him as closely as some of us, then I still would encourage people to check it out.
Absolutely. So, what are two or three things that really stood out to you when Tyler was making his assessments with the help of the generative AI while getting the book out?
Sure. So he did an interesting thing where he released his book. He's calling it a generative book. This
Yep.
is a new term. And he's basically trained a chatbot specifically on his manuscript so that you can ask the chatbot questions and it will sort of almost write you a little tiny sort of snippet of the book to answer your question, and it's sort of conversational. And I think this is really interesting. I mean, of course, this is new. The whole large language model technology is fairly new. So no one has grown up with this, right? So this was my very first generative book. And so I saw that he had released his book, and I went to the website, and I saw that I could download the actual book manuscript as a PDF, but then I also saw that I could sort of interrogate the generative book, which I had never done before. So the first thing I did was to try the generative book. And the structure of his book is this question of, who's the greatest of all time? And so he goes through the biography of several different famous economists, and he examines, their strengths and their weaknesses. And I think he's obviously taking this from the sports world where, people love to sit around and talk about, which athlete is truly the greatest of all time and what were their greatest achievements and did they have any weaknesses? And so he's going through this one at a time with a lot of the economists that you will have heard of. And so, I had the chatbot in front of me, and I just did what you would naturally do. I just said, okay, who's the GOAT? And the chatbot sort of gave me an answer that was a few paragraphs long. I kind of almost regretted doing that because I know that I know that he had written this book with a more traditional format in mind. And he's done a really good job of sort of playing with this dramatic structure. And of course, nonfiction books can have a dramatic structure and, sort of leading you up to, the greatest of all time assessment. And so I have gone back and I have read some of the chapters, the sort of the way they were intended, which I would encourage anyone to do. And so I think the generative book idea is an interesting idea, and I'm very pro experimentation, so people are going to try it. But I don't really see generative books replacing books. I mean, it's a fundamentally very different experience, and it felt a little bit more like using a search engine than, you know, I mean, it is a little bit like talking to an expert, and that is nice to have access to. But I don't believe that it replaces the experience of reading the book as the author intended you to read it. So, of course, these chatbots are part of our lives now, and they're not going anywhere. But I feel like we're just sort of learning what they're best at, and we're learning what the traditional, media and sort of social interaction is really meant for.
No, I think that point you made about books is super interesting. I think many years ago I was reading some article. I think it was Neil Gaiman's The View from the Cheap Seats, where he quoted Douglas Adams, who once told him that books are like sharks. They were there from the time of the dinosaurs, and they're still there after the dinosaurs are gone. So don't expect the book to be replaced by anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So let me get down to brass tacks and make this and put you in a spot. Who, according to you, is the goat?
Oh, wow. Um, Well, Tyler makes a strong case for Milton Friedman. Not that he was a perfect, human being, not that he knew everything. Nobody knows everything and no one can be right every single time, but he did really change the way that people think about markets, and he really made a case for letting markets decide some of the outcomes in society, and instead of trying to have some, one expert sort of be in control of everything. And I think those points were really powerful. And I mean, I think most societies are a little bit freer today, directly because of Milton Friedman and because of, all the work he did and the risks he took. And so I think there's a strong case for that. I am sort of a student of Vernon Smith, who's a Nobel Prize winner. He didn't make the book, but in terms of people who've had an impact on me, he's been very important, and he really pioneered a whole field within economics of experimental economics. So, if someone's going to read my book on GOAT, that he's going to be included. But yeah, I do think that the case for Milton Friedman was pretty strong. And but there were, many really brilliant economists who made great contributions, and it was interesting to sort of see it laid out the way it was.
So that's really interesting. So I'm going to put you in a spot once again and ask you, who do you think was who's overrepresented and who's underrepresented in the world of being, sorry for the poor choice of words, but an institution in themselves as far as economics is concerned. Because when I read GOAT, a couple of names that I felt should have been there were, for example, Henry George, I felt should have been there. I
Mm.
think his land reform ideas were absolutely incredible, and they were far ahead of, uh, you know, uh, they were really ahead. They were really far out in a certain sense. I felt David Ricardo should have been there, and
Mm.
I felt, maybe this is a little premature, but I felt Adrian McCloskey should have been there, just to, really turn it around and give it a little bit of the, McCloskey edge.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's me. Who would it have been for you?
I am also a big fan of Deirdre McCloskey. I've gotten to meet her a few times, and I think her books are really, really good, and have really changed the way that we understand, the past and today. Um, so I think he picked a lot of the heavy hitters. I mean, the noticeably absent names are some of the most powerful people in academia today.
Mhm.
And
Right.
and Tyler talks about why that is in the last chapter, and he talks about how the incentive structure within academia today rewards a certain kind of work. And not that it's not important, but just that it's probably not going to be as influential as some of the people that he mentions. I mean, some of the people that he mentions had long careers in government, as opposed to, Ivy League schools, where they would have had sort of the time and the incentive to, publish in such a way as to sort of achieve, power within academia today. And so, there are some big names that were left out, and that was really addressed at the end, sort of thematically of what he thinks economists do today versus what they were doing at the time when the people that he was naming were alive.
Great answer, but I'm going to hold you to three names.
So you want me to name someone who is really good that wasn't included in the book?
Yeah, according to you.
According to me. Well, I mean, someone who's done really great work in the sort of the field that I'm in is John List, who's at the University of Chicago. He's gone back and forth between industry and academia and government, some as well, and has run some projects at the kind of scale where you might actually change the way that a school is run or a city is run. He's just a really high energy guy, has had a huge influence on a lot of people that I know. And so I think that he's going to continue having a big impact on the field and the country and the world. So, that's one name. I mean, Raj Chetty has had a big influence on the world and on the profession, and, getting access to sort of like government level data within the United States was a real game changer in terms of the questions that you can ask. Most people either have to work with publicly available data or, in my little world, you sort of create your own data, but you're constrained by, budgets and other things. And, you can only create such a large data set. So I think, having sort of the vision to go after that and use that was impressive.
Awesome. So, just to go back, you said that, you were an experimentalist. You're from the experimentalist school of economics, if I'm not mistaken, right? So,
Yeah.
how does that differ from the traditional school of economics? And, I'm just curious to know that.
Sure. I mean, it's a method. I don't think of it as a world apart from economics. I mean, it's a way of generating a kind of data that allows you to do causal inference. I mean, if you read papers that are not experimental economics papers, there's pages and pages and headaches and citations and all, like, so many problems with trying to infer causality from natural experiments or existing data, and so we sort of sidestep that by just creating our own data and trying to get sort of two comparable samples, but the only difference between them is that one has been exposed to a certain treatment. And then you can try to attribute differences in outcomes to that actual treatment because of the controlled environment. And so, these days there are lots of different types of experiments that are run. Some of them are called field experiments. And the more maybe classic ones would be called lab experiments. And the advantage of the lab is that you have even more sort of control over what's happening. And, you really know all the influences that a person is under at any one given time. So I don't think we're asking different questions. It's just a slightly different method. We're not sort of restricted to the data sets, as I mentioned before, sort of the publicly available data sets, the ones that people have already used for a lot of different things. And also, any method is going to naturally lead you to a certain set of questions that's best suited for that method and for that type of data. Examining like game theory, individual decision making, labor economics questions. I think some of those questions are sort of most sort of conducive to the method.
I completely agree. Maybe I framed it quite poorly, but the way that I would sort of reframe it is that would one of the upsides of this approach be that you will not have the sort of replication issues which social science has been sort of struck by, because you're being extremely focused and you're being extremely direct in how you're actually gathering the data to actually run the experiments, run the idea, have the framework. So would this be one of the upsides to this sort of an approach?
Well, I'm flattered that you would think my field doesn't have replication problems.
No, I didn't say that. I said that there is an upside to it. I didn't say that it was a certainty.
Yeah. I think one of the upsides of the sort of classic lab experiment is that you could replicate it. You could say, I don't believe this result, therefore I'm going to go do exactly what they did, and see what happens. And that's not really true of it's hard to do that with a large field experiment. And you can go to sort of a similar place. You could work under a similar time horizon, but you'll be doing it, in a different year with a different government, and it's just going to be harder to replicate the conditions as precisely. Um, so yeah, I guess at the very least you can go back and replicate things, and there are some results that have replicated, hundreds or thousands of times at this point, and so you're not so worried that this is just a fluke, or it's just some kind of like publication bias at play. The results that have been replicated many times in many different labs, I think, are quite reliable. So yeah.
Understood. So, you had a paper out which was on the willingness to be paid in technology job training. So, can you give a brief synopsis of that paper to our audience before we dive into certain questions on it?
Sure, I'd love to. So I am examining this question of what influences the decision of a person, especially a younger person who has sort of their career ahead of them, to pursue opportunities in tech. So this is a pretty good field to go into if you can stand the work. I mean, salaries tend to be high, well above the median for jobs in the United States, and this is fairly true around the world. And so there are more people getting computer science degrees today than like 50 years ago. So I mean, there are more people going into this field. There are young people moving to San Francisco, but not kind of at the rate that you might expect given the returns that seem to exist there. So there isn't a lot of great data on this. I think part of it goes back to this idea that, if you run an experiment, you create a kind of data that's just not available any other way. So I did an experiment where I tried to just examine this decision of, would you sort of on the margin do more programming and why, and what might influence that decision. And before I ran the experiment, I read a lot of the policy literature that I could find on this issue and what other people had sort of speculated drives this decision. So I tried to incorporate that into my design.
So, one of the really interesting things that I thought when I was going through the paper is, it would be so interesting to run that study here in India, where
Yeah.
there is a massive number of absolute there's a massive number of engineers that India produces year on year, right? So when you go back and you ask these people who graduate from engineering school, what made you go and decide to be an IT professional or a software professional or a technology professional in the first place. I was just wondering how far the divide would be between the choices that somebody, say, in the States makes versus somebody in India might make. So, do you think one of the aspects might be, something that's cultural and a lack of certain or a vision that has been sold of a tech job that makes it extremely marketable to parents who sort of feel that that their kids should get into this profession for the safety net that the income might provide.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would love to do this in India if I could get the right set of co-authors. So tell your friends. But I do think culture plays a big role in it, and I think that in the U.S. there are some high-profile uh, successes in terms of technology jobs, and yet it's still not quite as ingrained as the career track like an accountant or a doctor or a dentist. And if you're thinking about young people today and they're looking around and they're thinking, what did my friends' parents do, you're still probably not going to have a ton of them who who can point to a long career in like programming or IT. So I do think, culture and peers and parents and teachers are important. And that's part of what the experiment was designed to capture. So one thing I did in the experiment is I tried to randomly assign a message to, one portion of the subjects. But I also asked them a lot of questions afterwards about sort of the messages they'd already received in their lives. Had they taken classes? Had they been encouraged to do this? Do they have a parent, in that sector? So I tried to capture that through the survey as well.
Interesting. And there also is a certain level of rejection for these jobs that are willing to pay you as well. So, for example, you have your income sharing agreements, your Bloom Tech, and all these other startups that are willing to pay you while you train for high tech jobs. But somewhere the decision is to not do it, like you said, because of the workload, because of the lifestyle, because of the culture. It's very interesting. So I'm going to frame this slightly differently. I always have this belief that the political economy always eats the scientific economy. So what I mean by that is, for example, when Oppenheimer came out, I think it reminded a lot of people of what America was like when the people running it were the likes of Vannevar Bush and Oppenheimer and Taylor and Fermi, where you're at the edge of invention. And I think post the Manhattan Project, when they went off to their universities, they spawned a whole new generation of theoreticians and scientists. And I think that paved the way for the growth that came from 1950 to 1970. What do you think needs to be done to actually have that sort of a scientific economy over the political economy mindset, given today's day and age?
Yeah, and maybe the space race is even a better example of something that was very positive and inspirational, and made a lot of people decide that they wanted to do the hard work. I mean, a physics degree does involve some hard work, and
Absolutely.
something has to make you want to do that math. And another aspect of this is what we call opportunity cost in economics. And if you are smart and ambitious and capable, there are a lot of things you can do besides science or tech. And that's something that I tried to capture in the experiment as well. And so I think, especially in the United States, there are other things people could do. That a lot of people who like ideas and are sort of willing to work hard will end up going to law school. So
Yeah.
sometimes I think, on the margin, could we get a couple of those people, on the science and tech track? And something has to sort of make them decide that it's going to be interesting and going to be worth it. And so, some of our innovations in the past few decades have been, iPhones and social media companies, and a lot of the innovation is in like how to place an ad in a strategic way to get someone who didn't really want to click on it to click on it. And it's just hard to like dedicate your whole life to that, even though there's money in it. And I'm not saying that that's all that Facebook is about. I mean, I actually think Facebook has added value. It's a tool that I use every day. But does it inspire people to dedicate their life to learning programming? I'm not sure. And again, I think that technology has made our lives much better. And every something I like to point out is like every organization needs IT people and programmers these days. The military, the government, the hospitals. It's not just Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon. These skills are very widely valued. Cybersecurity is a growing field. So even though we had the sort of high profile the tech session, the layoffs at the
Yep.
big tech companies, which that's painful for the individuals involved, and it has really changed Silicon Valley. But if I'm thinking about a student in Alabama, if they ought to learn computer programming, even if they're not going to move to California, I would say yes. I think that there are going to be good opportunities for someone who's willing to learn and sort of willing to just jump into an organization and solve problems. And then, of course, with neural networks and artificial intelligence, there's just this huge, vacuum for talent of people who are willing to sort of, pick it up and run with these new tools, which I think is a very exciting area. I mean, I'm actually writing 2, possibly 3, if you count it, papers on ChatGPT right now. And I think that that's also going to change programming a little bit, because some of the more tedious things can now be done, with the help of Copilot. And it doesn't mean that programmers are not useful. It just means that they're more valuable and that the work is less sort of tedious than it used to be. So I think anyone who recognizes that would actually be even more excited to just, jump in and sort of find an opportunity at this point.
That's super interesting. So I'm going to juxtapose that with a framing that I borrow from Peter Thiel, where he says that there has been too much innovation in the world of bits and not enough in the world of atoms, right?
Hmm.
So when you spoke about a person being trained for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years at a
Hmm.
bachelor's, master's, and a PhD level to understand where to exactly place that one ad that drives strategic and economic value for a company, right?
Yeah.
In I'm just thinking out loud here. So the incentive structure for doing information technology work is quite settled. It's quite well understood. You know what the career trajectory is. You know what the growth path is. You know where are the different companies competing.
Well, you say that. I don't know if that would be true. I mean, is that true for most high schoolers in India?
I agree, but this is based on the
I don't
assumption
know if
that
that would be
they
true of most high schoolers in the US, that they know the career track, that they understand, how to start out and how to become a senior. So I think that might be part of the problem, actually, is that I sort of tangentially, know that I have a few friends who work in tech. I don't actually work at a tech company. But I think it's interesting that you do sort of have a vision for what a person in tech can do and what their career can look like, because I don't know if that's true
I actually
globally.
agree with that because in my hypothetical, it's a person who's just come out of college. They finished their
Mhm.
first, they finished their bachelor's diploma, their degree. And the reason I even say this as an example is because while India might be producing a lot of engineers, there is a significant amount of capital that is invested by the companies that hire them to actually retrain them. Okay. So
Mhm.
what happens is that you come out with a piece of paper that tells you that you know how to write code. But then when they come back and test you and they try to put you on projects, they realize that you need to have workable code. You need to have reproducible code. You need to write component focused code, right? So they have to, shake all the assumptions that you know how to code, and they teach you everything back from scratch. So it's actually twice the cost of actually doing business. So, but I agree with you on a deeper point that most people, even in India, are unsure of what that career trajectory is going to be because all they understand is that, hey, if I'm going to attend an undergraduate education in computer science, this is what my course might be. These are some good schools to go to, and these are the companies that's going to come on campus and offer me a job. I agree. Uh, while that level of clarity is there while making choices, I somehow feel that is not there for the other sciences and the other technologies. So if you want to do nuclear engineering, or you want to do petroleum engineering, or you want to do, brain computing interfaces, or whatever biochemistry, or neurochemistry or whatever, right? That level, or basic physics or basic chemistry, that level of clarity has not been drilled down by the culture to these people to make choices. So, do you think that
Mhm.
we are actually restricting the funnel of choices that people actually have in terms of what they can do with a tech job?
Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend a biology degree for someone who wants a tech job. I mean, And I know less about the hard sciences. I think some people who graduate with a biology degree actually have trouble finding a job
Yeah,
that fits their skills. So I think petroleum engineering is still a pretty good way to go. And I think computer science is a pretty good way to go. And maybe one of the reasons you have such a clear idea of what someone would do with a computer science degree is because there's actually a higher demand for those skills in industry. I mean, I know something about the academic track with something like biology or chemistry. And then, there's some corporate research jobs and there's some, smaller pharmaceutical companies. I mean, yeah, I think there are opportunities for scientists for sure, but I don't know those tracks as well as possibly the tech
I
track.
understand. No, I was just saying that because it's interesting in the sense that, a lot of our understanding of what the future is going to be, we always think through the lens of information technology. But
Hmm.
if we are going to survive as a species, right, we are going to need better sources of fuel. We're going to need better sources of energy capture. We're going to need better sources of food. So, and it's actually interesting because if you break any science down deep enough, you'll understand the underlying layers of data that actually make it. And because you have 60 years of history, 80 years of history in actually assembling these data assets into specific forms using specific algorithms, you'll be able to have reproducible ideas in these fields inspired by computer science. So that's why I was saying that, for example, bioinformatics is a really interesting space in India. Why is that? Because it's got three very interesting sectors that young people in India actually pursue: computer science, electrical engineering, and bioengineering or biotechnology, right? So what India needs to do is not just produce the information technology professionals, but also have companies and corporations and research bodies actually incentivize people to say that, hey, we will support you when you make this transition from your computer science degree into bioengineering or into biotechnology. Or if you're already in biotechnology, hey, we will support you through the process of actually acquiring statistical and programming skills to actually ensure that you are actually at the cutting edge of actually producing a lot of these resources that the world might need in the future. So, and I think one of the other things that your paper even touched upon is what should be the incentive structure for people to actually make these choices.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, there's a question of sort of who should take on the risk of the sort of instability in the market. I mean, you could imagine a world where there's a company that even pays for your undergraduate degree and that you would somehow be able to contract with them, that you would work for them afterwards. I mean, there's all sorts of risks involved. And right now, to some degree, companies want you to do some training on your own. But then, like you said earlier, they still have to train you when you show up, and we sort of have a kind of equilibrium right now, but that might be changing with things like boot camps and other ways for individual employees to signal that they're serious and that they're open to learning. So I mean, it's pretty rare for a professional track to have this sort of boot camp backdoor, but because there's so much demand for technology professionals, some people are able to make that jump, no matter what they did in college and no matter what they did right out of college. If they're sort of able to, make the time and spend a little sort of time and money retooling, then sometimes they can jump into a company or start their own. um, so right, how do you incentivize people to acquire these skills, do some hard work, do some boring work, and what kind of guarantees could you offer to, a 20-year-old, a 22-year-old that would make them think differently about it? And so, with a sort of American perspective here, I think that sometimes that might draw people away to other more traditional career tracks where they foresee having more stability over the long run. I think if tech companies don't want to make commitments to their employees, then they'll also have to pay more. I mean, companies have complained, I can't get good workers, I'm paying them $150,000 and I can't get good workers. But if you're going to fire them in 3 months, then,
Yep.
maybe you need to pay them more to get them to show up and to get them to sort of commit to the current project, because there are lots of other career tracks that offer a lot more stability.
Agreed. And as these training programs go, I want to also just briefly dive into the impact of media on learning, right? So even there is a certain sense of influence that the kind of programs you take really affect how you retain information, right? And whether it is with generative books, or whether it is with coding boot camps, or whether it is with a traditional college degree, do you think that the market underrates or doesn't consider how people actually learn or consume information, and puts people on a
Hmm.
one size fits all approach, which is why the outcomes are not appropriate in a certain sense of people's own talent and caliber and potential?
Yeah, yeah. So, to demonstrate an ability to both, have hard skills that can contribute to a project, but also sort of have the soft skills to work as a team and sort of understand the vision of the leaders. And it's a lot. It's a lot to ask of one person, is to, really know at least one coding language well enough to contribute, but also, have some of that, big picture thinking skills to know sort of what's being asked of you, and how to construct a timeline and how to communicate with a team. I mean, some people have said that a coding boot camp's not enough, that 3 months isn't enough. I think one of the advantages to boot camps is they really focus on projects, and they really focus on sort of the marketable skills. And a university program might tend to be sort of more conservative in showing people some of the basics and some of the theory behind the tools. And I think ideally someone would know the theory behind the tools they use, and not just sort of what's going to make this box appear today. But uh, I think you're just going to have a lot of variety for a long time. I mean, some positions they're going to require a college degree, and some they won't, and it might partly depend on what they're asking people to do and the experiences they've had with people coming out of different programs. But I think just having your own GitHub account where you can just show people that I personally did a project from start to finish. I think that's important. Internships can be good too. And I mean, I know our university is big on internships, and I assume that's just a very, broad trend, is that a lot of programs, they won't let you graduate without an internship, because they know how important it is to supplement your book learning with, getting out there, seeing how real projects work. I mean, personally, to the extent that I can program, and I'm not, an expert by any means, it's because there were tools that I wanted to build, and so I just built them, and I just did whatever it took to get them built and get them made. And so I always encourage people who come to me and they ask, I want to learn Python. What should I do? Where should I start? And there are so many great resources out there. There are free programs online that'll help you sort of learn some of the syntax. But I always encourage people to just find something you actually want to build, even something small, a tiny little web application. It has to be small to start, but otherwise you'll just never do it, and you won't retain what you're learning if you don't sort of know why you're doing it. So I think, applying that to education, you would want students to feel some kind of ownership over a project of their own before they get into a big company or a big team, because that's really kind of how you see, error shooting, troubleshooting, and dealing with errors, and see some of those things for yourself before you join someone's team.
Understood. That's actually super interesting, considering the fact that given the student debt crisis in the U.S., One way to sort of frame it would be in terms of, are you choosing a path where the outcome is projects, or are you choosing a path where the outcome is prestige? So there are people who graduate from certain programs and from certain universities simply because it is a prestigious degree to sort of pursue. And then when you come out with that degree, you suddenly find yourself that the world is a much harsher and much more economically rational place. But what does happen is that if you take a path where prestige is not the outcome, and like you said, projects are the outcome, where you get your hands rough and dirty, and you get down and you build stuff and you work with people smarter than you who will teach you how to do the right things if you're self-taught. I think that is a far more rewarding journey for some people, not for everybody. I'll add that caveat in there. So, what disincentivizes people to choose a project based path versus a prestige based path?
It's a good question. And the information is available. I mean, you can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you can see the average wages for different career tracks and different professions and different college degrees, and the information is out there. And so you do sort of wonder why more people don't take advantage of it. But I think part of it is just that it's hard to keep up with a changing world, and there are some things that would have guaranteed a job 40 years ago that won't anymore. And we're in a complex global economy, a service economy, and it's you can't expect an 18-year-old to know everything, right? To know all the careers open to them and all the different tracks through those careers and all the associated salaries and what city they would need to move to. So I do think there is a role for mentorship and what I called sort of encouragement in the paper. And so in the experiment that I ran, I tried to encourage people and failed. And so I think we can have a whole conversation about that. I think the kind of encouragement that would scale as a policy may not work very well, because if it's going to scale as a policy, it has to be quick and easy and cheap, and that is kind of meaningless, and people are smart enough to know that it's meaningless. But if it's if it's with someone who knows you and who knows the local market, or who has some experience in industry, then that still might matter. I don't interpret my results to mean that encouragement and advice plays no role in this at all.
Noted. So I just want to, this has been a super hardcore discussion on a lot of things related to your paper, both in terms of substance and also in terms of certain tangents that we have gone on. But just to sort of make it slightly lighter, you also wrote about your experience watching Barbie on your blog, and I saw that. Uh, so talk to me about what that was like. And you wrote about a couple of pieces about wage equality, Keynes's 15-hour work weeks, and what does a world of leisure look like when there is abundance, and people care so much about nostalgia. So I know I'm throwing a lot of things that you have written, but break it down for me and for our listeners.
Sure. So I did go see the Barbie movie, and I thought it was really fun. And I think one possible interpretation of it is that it's sort of the latest Will Ferrell movie. Greta Gerwig did an incredible job directing like an interesting, funny movie, and you could just watch it for fun and not try to go super deep on it.
Yeah.
But like any good piece of art, you can go super deep on it. And obviously, there's a lot of gender issues that are raised fairly explicitly. But something that, as an economist, that I thought was interesting that maybe other people wouldn't have noticed is I thought their treatment of work and career was interesting. And so, in the Barbie universe, as far as I understand it, and I mean, I saw the movie once, so I don't know if I was missing something. As far as I understand it, they kind of have everything they need, and they don't really need to work. Like the main character, I don't know if she has a career, and she seems to have a nice house and food and everything, and it all
Yeah.
just sort of like appears out of like thin air,
The super
which is
abundant
great.
society. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's the dream, like good for her. But then she has like a friend who's president and a friend who's a doctor, And no one ever seems to get sick, but they have doctors anyway. Which I think just demonstrates that there is a certain kind of prestige that comes with being a medical doctor, and it's obviously a widely recognized profession. And you think hard, like I'm not presenting this as a plot hole, but if you think hard, like, why is there a doctor in Barbie universe? I mean, it's because there's some kind of benefit that people get, to having certain types of careers, and in a sense, it's like people want a challenge even if they don't need them to survive, right? And
Can I?
so,
I'm so sorry for interrupting. Can I throw another hypothesis in there as to why there are doctors?
sure.
Because in a super abundant society, people can look young indefinitely. So these are the doctors who run your CRISPR-Cas9 genetic modification. So you need them. So you might be 150 years old, but you look like
Mhm.
you're still in your early 20s. So maybe
Sure.
that's why the high. This is just me, sort of. I'm so sorry for interrupting. Please go ahead.
It's fine. It could be plastic surgeon Barbie. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of the discussion it was really about, how do we have a good society? How do we be happy? And no one seemed to be worrying too much about, how do we just provide, the basics, food and shelter that we need to survive. That all seemed to be sort of taken for granted. But, now that we're all here, how do we exist together? How do we deal with dividing sort of prestige and resources between men and women and mothers and daughters. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought that it prompts a lot of good discussions.
I absolutely agree. And the other thing that you also touched upon is that there's still a sense of nostalgia that people have for these brands. And if you really think about it, I don't know how many people think about it. Oppenheimer is actually a brand. So for those who have read the Kai Bird biography, if you think Oppenheimer, you think of the Kai Bird biography, and you think of making of the atomic bomb, and you think of those really hardcore. I mean, if you do follow the Manhattan Project at a deep level, Oppenheimer is a brand. So when people
Mhm.
think of the A bomb, they think of Oppenheimer. They rarely think of Feynman. They rarely think of Fermi. They rarely think of Teller. They rarely think of They rarely think of Dirac and any of these other people who worked on the project, right?
Mhm.
So that is a non-market brand, whereas
Mhm.
Barbie is a very well-established brand. So how do you think? What do you think if you are running a corporation today that's having a legacy character? Like, let's say that you're running Pillsbury, right? The Doughboy is an iconic character, right?
Mhm.
As the CEO of Pillsbury, how would the results of the success that Barbie has had influence your ability to make decisions to actually grow your brand?
Well, I mean, I think the implications are clear for Hollywood, at least. I mean, if you could have tried to make a movie about a group of scientists, but not with the Oppenheimer brand.
Yeah,
And you could have had all the same discussions about science and politics and, weapons. Like, you could have tried to do that without the Oppenheimer brand, and it probably would have been much harder to get people out. Or
yeah,
you could have had a movie about, dolls and gender and mothers and daughters, but without the Barbie brand, it would have been much harder to get people to come
yeah,
out. So, it's hard to sell a truly original story. And I think, Top Gun, they
yeah,
did so well. And the original movies from like the 80s, I mean, this
yeah,
talking about nostalgia and sort of what gets people to sort of trust you, or
yeah.
invest in a 2 hour experience. It's sort of the same story. So I think that it does illustrate the value of nostalgia and the value of brands, as you said. And for selling anything, selling toys at Walmart, in addition to selling movies at the box office, people want something that makes them feel sort of part of a story that they recognize. So Pillsbury should definitely keep the Doughboy and probably do more with it. And it's just very hard to introduce a brand new character like that. Or you saw the Taylor Swift movie doing very well because, of course, that's a very iconic brand. And so, like you said, Oppenheimer is a brand, Taylor Swift is a brand, Barbie is a brand. And it's
Yeah, but
it's
but but I don't know how many people would agree that Oppenheimer is a brand the way that we actually see it on toothpaste or Happy Meals or whatever, right? So you don't walk into McDonald's and say I want the Oppenheimer Happy Meal and you open that box and there's like an explosion, right? So yeah,
yeah.
that's a niche market brand is how I would frame it. But let me just go back to Barbie for 1 second. There is a certain lens of gendered expectations in that movie. Okay. And I have always been weirded out by why are people still writing with those certain expectations that this is how it should be. And we've had hundreds of years of economics. Okay. What might happen if I get a Tyler Cowen or if I get a Paul Krugman or a Deirdre McCloskey to come sit with the screenwriters and tell them, no, 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 what you're doing is old, hashed out. That's the way you assume the world works. This is how the world is going to work. Or this is a more optimized version of how society should operate. Why don't you take this model and write your story around that? What do you think? How do you think the expectations might change if you introduce an economist into the screenwriting process?
Um, I think what you might be referencing is increasing gender equality and the sort of entrance of women into the workforce. So, the Nobel Prize in economics this year went to Claudia Golden, who's most famous for
Yeah.
really, finding the data and telling the story of
Yes.
women from sort of my grandmother's generation up through today, and the different set of opportunities that women have, which is certainly a larger set today than it was before. um, but I think we're also finding some fairly sort of intractable problems with sort of what you might just call parenthood
Yeah.
and the modern economy. And I
Yeah.
think you have a lot of people, and it's going to fall most heavily on women for sure, but you have a lot of people who feel a sort of tension between sort of pursuing their dreams and pursuing parenthood.
Yeah.
And the one of the surprises of the Barbie movie, and I hate to ruin it for anyone, but is that so much of it is actually about the mother of the little girl. And there's this interesting thing here where you're sort of led to believe that if it's about a doll, then it's also going to be about a little girl. But the truth is, it's really very much about a mother. And I mean, just as a side note, millennials like myself are becoming kind of the biggest market. And so I can go see the Barbie movie. Like, maybe I could take my daughter to a Taylor Swift concert, and I think people are going to be catering to us as an
Yeah.
economic block a lot going forward. But
Yeah.
that's unrelated. So yeah, so exploring the issues that this adult woman is going through is interesting. And she, they present her as someone who has a job but who doesn't really like it. Like, she's not the president, she's not some like high power lawyer who's feeling like she has a huge impact on the
Yeah.
world. She sort of has like a job that takes a lot of time and energy, but doesn't seem super fulfilling, which I think is an interesting contrast to what we were talking about earlier of like what sort of the Barbie careers are. But I guess what you're asking is, if they had an economist in the room, would they have written that script differently in light
Yeah.
of sort of what the data says about
Yeah.
gender
So
equality? And I don't know if it would have changed so much. I mean, I think there's still a lot of challenges that resonate with the audience, in sort of how to make a life, and how to communicate with your tween daughter. And I don't think those problems have just disappeared in the past few decades.
you know what? This just gave me like an idea. If anybody's listening and is interested in going ahead and doing it, I please recommend you go ahead and do it. Here's what struck me: like how Tyler had the generative book, right? The You have the algorithm that you have trained, and you can go ask questions to it, etc. Right? I was just imagining three versions of Barbie. One where the inputs from Paul Krugman goes in, one from Claudia goes in, and one from probably Milton Friedman. And I was just wondering, what might be the synopsis of these stories in a world that they imagine to be the future. And but at the core of it is the mother and child relationship. How might
Hmm.
they visualize the future? Would it be a resource constrained future, or would that be a resource abundant future? And so, just a side note, just crossed my mind. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these days you can conjure up a still image in
yeah,
Midjourney for free,
yeah,
and it's not crazy to think that you could ask an AI to make you like Barbie movie plus Paul Krugman. Not that anyone really see that, but you probably could ask for it. Maybe in
yeah,
the next 10 years, maybe
yeah,
maybe it wouldn't be free. Maybe it would be $5, to pay for the
yeah,
computing power. But I
yeah.
mean, to think that that's even possible is pretty crazy. That would have been,
It's not just
insane 10
crazy.
years ago.
It's not just crazy. It's quite hilarious to even imagine Paul Krugman sitting in a room filled with Hollywood screenwriters telling them, "I don't think that's how it works," or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, on your website, one of the really interesting links you had given to was Hayek's paper on competition theory. So I want to know, why is it that that single paper is right over there on your website?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think one of the first questions you asked me is, who's the greatest economist of all time? And Hayek gets a lot of consideration in Tyler's new book. And he had a big impact on me personally in my decision to pursue economics. I read that article when I was, an undergraduate, and I just thought it was incredible. I thought he had really deep insights, and I also felt like no one had ever told me that before. It seemed so important and yet so underappreciated, and that was one of the things that made me want to sort of keep going with this. So he points out really the value of competition in helping us to discover what is good, and he just like, again, it's sort of a complex idea, but we really don't know what the next great product is. We don't know. And the smartest person in the world could not just sit down and, predict it,
Conjuring,
or even the smartest computer in the world could not sit down and predict it. I mean, you can try, but until you actually launch a product, you don't know. Like, do you remember Google Plus?
of course,
R- RIP, right? So,
absolutely,
even Google could not launch a social network, um, and you didn't know until you tried, right? Like, anyone might have thought it would be successful. They might have thought they had, the rails of Gmail, and the fact that it failed is so interesting. And you have all these ex post explanations, and you're going to convince yourself that you would have thought that that would have happened all along. But like, the truth is, nobody knew until it actually launched. And so it's the competition of actually, launching something in the market and seeing if consumers value it, and seeing if people can find uses for it in their own, lives and their own locations, that produces this information. So now we look back and we think, oh yes, the iPhone is great. It adds a lot of value to people's lives. It's convenient, it's useful. Now everyone, has their own camera. This all sort of makes sense in retrospect, but we only learned that through actually, launching it in the market and seeing if consumers, found uses for it, and liked using it. Um, so competition is so painful in the moment, and letting a company fail is so painful and horrible. And I am so sad when a restaurant closes in my town. And so I think there's a lot of bad feelings toward competition, because in the moment it's always hard to go through those changes, and to let some things fail. But he was making this just incredible sort of epistemic case for it, that without it you can't, move forward. You can't discover the good stuff. And so that definitely puts him in the running for greatest of all time. And to have sort of framed it in a way that people could understand and make a research project out of it, I think is important.
that's really one of the most insane things I've seen people sort of prescribe to, which is Past models of behavior can predict future outcomes, right?
Hmm.
And just because you have a model or you have an understanding of what people's wants are based on something that has happened in the past, you can build a solution for it in the future. Is quite insane in terms of building an actual product that actually sells in a very competitive market. And Mike Maples Jr. has this great idea called backcasting, right? So the forecast means you are in the present and you go to the future, right? And he says backcasting is you're already in the future and you come back to the present. So it's almost like, reductive versus inductive reasoning. So you take a large sample of ideas and you sort of narrow it all the way down to see this is what works because all these things actually happened in the past. Versus you see that, I have this one breakthrough, let's see what I can actually build going forward. And it's really interesting in that sense because if I were to ask you which of the following is a truly truly a product that actually escaped the competition? Would it be the iPhone or would it be the iPad?
Did you say iPhone versus iPad?
Yeah,
Um, that escaped the competition?
yeah.
You mean that is successful?
No, not just successful. So, so let me just sort of break it down. The mobile phone market was already a very competitive market with Research in Motion and Palm and all these other companies actually creating handsets. Nokia back in the day. It took one phone multiple standard deviations better than the status quo to really beat them out and become the norm of what a smartphone or a phone should be. And that's the iPhone. The iPhone escaped the competition simply because it was far better marketed in a very competitive market of portable mobile phones, right?
Mhm.
Whereas the iPad was very interesting because it is in this very interesting place between a phone and a laptop. Nobody knew that there was something actually in the middle, and they found this market that people might actually require. So how do you how so most people think in terms of these are my existing markets. How do you discover categories within that market that most people don't pay attention to?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I agree. The iPad was very new. It filled a space that no one even really, knew existed. Of course, there are some competitors now, but
Of
no,
course.
the iPad was absolutely the first. And I think that kind of goes back to, how we view it again. I mean, if you had showed that to me 6 months before launching and asked me to predict whether it would become so successful, I'm not sure what I would have said. It's hard to even put myself in that, mental space because now I'm so confident that it would work and that people do want this thing. But it could have failed, and then you would have had people say, well, of course it failed because people only want laptops or phones. And I mean, personally, I actually do a lot of work on my laptop, and I have not made the switch that a lot of my colleagues have made to the iPad. I feel like I'm just so much more productive on a computer that I'll haul my laptop around all
Right.
over. But that's not very important for how it succeeds in the market. So I think that sometimes people have launched products like that and they haven't succeeded, but then we just don't think about them anymore. So one of the reasons why the iPad is an interesting story is because we all know about it because it succeeded. But I don't know if I can give you a formula for what the next success will be. And people have tried, like all the wearables technology, and do you want a shirt that talks to you, or do you want a shirt that regulates your temperature? Actually, the Fitbits have been more successful than I thought they
Yeah.
would be. There definitely does seem to be a market for a wearable watch.
Yeah.
And people are launching new products all the time that
Right.
fail, and that goes back to this idea that you just sort of have to try and see if people actually value it. AirPods are pretty great. You have to charge them. I mean, it's the most trivial thing, but should headphones have cords or not? Like, I mean, it's not an important problem, but it is in the sense that we all have headphones and we all have to kind of figure this out. And so,
Yep.
people went AirPods and then they loved the AirPods, but then they lost one, or then, they were frustrated that they have to charge it. And now people are rediscovering how great it is to have your headphones be attached to a cord.
Yep.
And, we just don't know until we try these things. I mean, you can try to test things in, small markets or focus groups, but like the market is going to figure out whether headphones should have cords or not. And that, or maybe we should just have both, having no
Yeah.
cords sometimes is really great, but people, I think, are rediscovering why it made sense to have it be attached to something in the first place.
Agreed. So let me go back to the Hayek paper. Are there any papers that you go back to and read regularly that made a profound impact on you?
I would love to have more time to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't do as much of that as I wish I did. But so, sometimes if you're just pretty busy and you're teaching multiple classes and writing multiple papers at the same time, your reading is largely dictated by sort of what you really need to do that week.
Correct.
But if there is a classic worth going back to, it's the competition paper. And sometimes the fun thing about teaching is you can work some things like that into a course assignment, and get a chance to sort of have that conversation again, which is good for you too.
So you also had a pretty interesting paper on intellectual property and wealth creation. So can you talk to me a little bit about, how do you balance the chaotic beast that is IP law and the maybe not even the chaotic beast, I would say the immovable object, which is IP law, and the unstoppable force, which is entrepreneurship.
That's a nice way to phrase it. Yeah, so a paper that I really love that I did with my co-author Bart Wilson is about intellectual property protection. And we put people in an environment where we could control a lot of things, and we could give half the groups IP protection, and then we could let half the groups try to operate without it and kind of just see what happened. And we gave people some choices over how to spend their time. And we also allowed people to chat with the other players in their group throughout the whole thing, so that we could get a sense of sort of what's going on in their minds, and not just as individuals, but as groups, because property is really a social concept. And intellectual property doesn't really mean anything to someone who lives alone in the woods, right? It's about how you as a group reward creativity and reward innovation in acknowledging that it cost the person something to make that creation. So we sort of implement that in the experiment through an idea of opportunity cost, which also features in the programming paper too, where someone who goes to the studio to make a creative good gives up some of the time they could have spent making something else that's not as valuable, but sort of more reliable in terms of, allowing them to earn some money in the experiment. So we didn't tell them what we were looking for, and that's pretty typical in lab economics, as you sort of explain to people how they can make money, and then you just kind of let them go and see sort of what they do. And so we saw pretty rampant what you would call piracy, where they would take something that was created by another person and then resell it without trying to,
Attribution, no. Yep.
compensate the original creator. And then what was interesting, but something that we were looking for was, we kind of knew that would happen. We weren't sure how often it would happen. We kind of knew that would happen. And we were curious to see how that shaped their conversations. And there are some other property experiments that Bart Wilson has done where there's a different kind of theft. And if you steal what we would call a rivalrous good from somebody, then they don't have it anymore. And that prompts this immediate sense of injury. And again, with no sort of prompting on the part of the experiment, they'll say, you stole that.
Yeah.
Give that back to me. That's mine. You stole it. And we were sort of looking to see whether that would happen in the case of intellectual property, and it didn't happen. And so I think that intellectual property um, is a good thing, and I think in a modern economy, you ought to have copyright protection, and you ought to have ways to incentivize innovation. But it may help to just recognize fundamentally that it's not as intuitive as some of the other property rights that we sort of protect and enforce. And so understanding sort of the psychology of that, I think can lead to better policies. Um, I mean, I'm of the generation where you knew people who were pirating music on Napster, and you know, you didn't really think of them as criminals.
Yeah,
You knew they were doing it. You kind of knew it was not technically, you know, formally legal, but
yeah,
it's different from having a friend who you know is doing, like, you know, property crimes and other, you know, like assaulting people, right? You know,
yeah.
it's just psychologically sort of different. And so I think that's going to just have to be taken into account as we build policies as a society.
But just from a policy standpoint, you and I think can both agree on the fact that policy moves at a rate much slower than technology, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the rate at which you can bring amendments into the process for what constitutes intellectual property and what does not constitute intellectual property will always be facing this bottleneck problem on what should pass and what should not pass. And
Hmm.
because if everybody fights in a zero sum game, which is an intellectual property war, okay, I think
Hmm.
that generally tends to slow down the incentive to actually innovate, right? So one of the
Yeah.
reasons why open source was able to work is because nobody went and said that, it's my intellectual property. People
Hmm.
contribute to it and people built it out. I hope I'm getting that right.
Hmm.
And so, what do you think are certain anti patterns to actually watch out for to ensure that intellectual property does not become stagnant? And when you go and try and do revisions to that specific policy, you don't tear it all down and start from scratch all over again. So, how can it be a complex adaptive system in a certain sense where different types of data input really ensures that it gets up to date, it manages its levers, and is able to actually adapt to what people are trying to achieve, as opposed to somebody actually going and lobbying for those policies to actually be put in, because that's a time consuming process.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about Silicon Valley some already. And I mean, you could imagine an IP structure that would have made Silicon Valley much less dynamic and much less successful if every little step along the way had been
IP
allowed to be
protected.
patented.
Yeah.
Then, you know, you wouldn't have had people building all these tools because they wouldn't have been able to, or maybe you would have had much more concentration and vertical integration in the bad sense. So yeah, it's definitely hard to get it right, and I think there can be such a thing as too much IP protection as well, that actually slows down subsequent innovation. So I think it's a really interesting area, and you know, in a sort of tech based or you know, tech focused economy, it's important to get it right, and I think it's important to be open to experimentation and open to different rules for different areas. I mean, you could say that a pharmaceutical company needs a patent, but a tech company doesn't need a patent over like a next button. And I think being able to think about it in terms of economic benefit and social benefit is helpful. And recognizing that different types of innovation require different levels of sort of upfront fixed costs on the part of the innovator is helpful. So I don't have all the answers, but I do think it's a really interesting area and probably understudied, really.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking on the fly here, and one of the other hypothesis I'm sort of running is, should you be able to have IP policies based on what kind of tribe you ascribe to as part of a certain field? So, for example, you can be pure IP in software, you can be open source in terms of software, you can take the MIT license. So, should you be having these sort of broad tribal sort of IP structures based on who's contributing to that particular field? And you basically have similar models for, say, pharma. So, one of the problems with pharma or the biotech industry is that if there is a lot of proprietary market capture, which basically ensures that you're not able to get the best results out to the people who need it the most at a certain cost. Now, I agree that there is an incentive to actually ensure that there is IP over there, because that basically drives your ROI for the investment that you actually made to create the drug that you're actually looking to sell, right? But if you could really open source the underlying chemistry for it, how would that sort of change the game? Whether you're doing pharma, whether you're doing energy, whether you're doing computing, where does open source as a model fit into your privacy? If I may be as aggressive as to say your the arcane view of intellectual property law.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it's if everything was just suddenly in the public domain and suddenly open source, then you'd have this question of, would entrepreneurs, jump on that and make all these wonderful products,
Or would they
or
use it for evil?
well, there's always that. I mean, there's always trying to put Paul Krugman into the Barbie movie, which is probably an example of
Yeah,
evil.
yeah, yeah.
But or would this sort of destroy a bunch of infrastructure? You have a corporate lab that costs millions and millions of dollars a year to run, but now they can't, you know they can't be guaranteed any sort of future revenue stream from what they've contributed, and so they shut down, and then so yeah, again, it's definitely complicated and hard. I mean, the way the patent system works right now is you get granted a monopoly, but it's not forever. So you
Right.
get a certain number of years to earn those monopoly rents, and then it goes away, and then it does get open source. So,
Yeah.
patents are different from trade secrets because
Correct.
you actually do have to tell people what you're doing. And if you have trade secrets, then you have this attempt to sort of maintain that monopoly and not actually distribute the knowledge. So I think if you got rid of patents, other things would pop up. You might get more non-disclosure agreements, more trade secrets. And, is that better? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But, maybe just having a more flexible patent regime that works differently for different types of technology would help. Alex Tabarrok is someone who's written about this and has sort of a vision for trying to align your patent law with your economic surplus, and it does require some flexibility. And as technology changes, I think you'd have to be open to updating it pretty frequently.
Understood. So, one final question before we move into our very original rapid fire section. I see that you're wearing a badge. Can you talk to me a little about it?
This is Elinor Ostrom.
Oh, lovely. Yeah,
And she is the first woman who won the Nobel Prize in economics and has done some
amazing.
really interesting work on institutions. So I did get this for free at a conference, but I just put it on this jacket and never took it off.
That is awesome. I think Elinor Ostrom is somebody that I am going to go back and read a lot more about, because I was trying to do some research in terms of smart cities and open government and stuff like that, and her work kept coming up,
Hmm.
and so major shout out to Elinor Ostrom, and please go
Yeah.
check out her work.
Yeah.
So we'll move into our rapid fire section. So my first question: what's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Um, Keep reading. Don't, my younger self, I don't know how young we're going, but,
It's your hypothetical.
I I didn't have Facebook for my entire life, and I didn't have smartphones for my entire life. And I think that I do believe in both of them, but I think that you can spend too much time on both of them. And so to stick with some of the older technologies consciously, not because you have to, but because they carry some of those benefits.
Understood. Number two, what are some books that have changed the way you think and engage with the world?
Well, we covered the Hayek article, Competition as a Discovery Procedure. I really like a book by Tyler Cowen called The Complacent Class. I don't know if that's his most popular book, but it's something that has sort of changed the way that I see American society. And it intersects with so many of the conversations that I see people having about housing and mobility. So that a lot of these ideas are out there, with or without his book. But I think he had a really sort of interesting lens on that, several of those issues that I found to be interesting. Um, and right now I'm reading The Hobbit with my son, and I think that some of the just classic fiction that I've read has influenced me and has just given me sort of a vision for what good people do and what a good society is.
Absolutely. What is one thing that annoys you about other people that you sometimes tend to do yourself?
Probably interrupting. I think if you're a professor, you like to talk, and I think it really bothers me when people interrupt me, but I admit it's something I do to other people. So I am a work in progress, and we'll try to do that less.
So, just I know that we're in the middle of the rapid fire, but just as an aside, one of the most mind-bending things I ever saw was on YouTube. There was a series of lectures by Marvin Minsky on his book, The Society of Mind. And, here comes out, a man who's, trotting in at the age of, I don't know, 80, 85 or something. And usually when you expect lectures, you expect big boards, big equations, big slide decks, continuous talking. And this man just comes out and he says, does anybody have any questions? That's how he started his class. And I was
Wow.
like, man, that is some way to start a class.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. My next question is, what's your go-to method for overcoming procrastination or writer's block?
Um, well, my schedule these days is largely determined by my children. And so, um, when they're in school, that's my best time to work. And I think that is limiting in a way because, there are people who can work more than 8 hours a day. But it also, I think, helps you focus a little bit, and helps you sort of make good use of that time. Doing the kind of research that I do, I don't think you have the same type of writer's block problem as you might have writing a novel. I don't face a lot of blank pages, is the truth. And there are moments when I really do feel like a writer, and there are parts of a paper that are hard to write. But again, you're not really starting with nothing. You're kind of
Right.
starting with a set of components, and then you're trying to put them together in a way that makes sense, or you're trying to go find more of them, and you're trying to develop a stopping rule for when you should stop finding more stuff and write. But I don't. I mean, I'd like to be more productive than I am, but I rarely think of writer's block as a limiting factor here. But that might
Understood.
change if I start writing novels, so I'll get back to you.
Understood. Understood. If you could time travel 25 years into the future, what are the top three questions you would want answers to regarding the state of technology in society?
Hmm. Well, I guess I hope that people are still engaging in human interaction, and I'd be very curious to see how that evolves with you know 3D glasses, AI chatbots. Uh, Again, I sort of expect there to still to be a lot of human interaction, but I'm curious to see sort of what they keep and what they toss out. So we've talked a little bit about that, paper books, things that we don't have to do anymore, but we might choose to still do them. And so, now that we can all do video calls, like it's so great that I can talk to you. I think that's wonderful. But I'll be curious to see how much people are still choosing to, walk out their door and talk to someone in person, even though you're stuck with the people you live near, um, interrupting you and all. So definitely curious to see how, media consumption, writing, and just conversation has evolved. I'm gonna try to think of another one. Another big one would be energy. That I'm under the impression that we could do a lot more with nuclear than we do, and I'll be curious to see where the constraints we face as a society sort of take us in terms of energy production and consumption. And will there be cars with internal combustion engines? Will anyone be allowed to drive their own car anymore? I really don't know, but I would certainly be looking around and asking around if I was in the future.
If you had to condense your life philosophy into one sentence, what would it be?
I'm gonna get writer's block here and ask you to get back to me on that one.
Got it. Next. What's a recent discovery or a piece of information that has blown your mind?
Recent, blown my mind. I mean, I think ChatGPT, right? I mean, that's the big one, as far as I know. So I actually have a paper on ChatGPT making mistakes, and so I believe people should be careful with this. Do your fact checking. Keep your brain on, and don't spend too much time with it. Get out and talk to other people and read other stuff. However, with that caveat, it's incredible, and it blows my mind. Some of the things it's really good at is like coding and some of the more tedious stuff. And so I've actually, I've used it just a little bit with my own work, not so much for writing, but for making graphs or making tables. So yeah, I mean, that's it for now.
Absolutely. What's the most valuable piece of advice you've ever received, and who's given it to you?
Um, I think I had really great parents who had a really positive impact on me. And I don't know if they so much told me what to do as they just demonstrated, a really engaged life. And so I think there's a kind of advice that you can get just through relationship, not necessarily, reduced to a one-liner. But I mean, if you're asking who had a big influence on me, obviously, some of my professors and colleagues, but got to be my parents number one.
Absolutely. Joy, my final question to you is, what's one daily habit or routine that has had a profound impact on your life?
Um, I think professors talk a lot about workflow, and I think we all believe that we are failures because we're not getting enough done, and we compare ourselves to people who are getting more done. But there's something about academic life that kind of keeps you on track. I mean, if you sign up for a conference, then you have to give a presentation, and so you're going to get ready for it. Or if you're assigned to teach a class, you're going to show up and do it. Or if you're writing a paper, you sort of have a timeline in mind. And I think that's one of the benefits of being part of academia, is there are all these sort of systems of accountability built in. And so again, no one feels like they're doing it right or they're doing enough. But I think maybe just learning to sort of use that system and work within it has been one of the best ways to promote productivity in a way. I mean, get up every day. Oh, blogging. I should have said blogging, because I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but I guess that's something that I've done that I didn't have to do. But writing every week for an audience is a great way to keep learning. And I really think of it as an input to research. It's not just sort of a product, but it's a way to organize your thoughts. You'll retain something you learned better if you write about it. So yeah, maybe that's something that's a little bit less obvious that I think has been good.
Absolutely. with that, thank you so much, Joy. It's been an incredible honor and a great pleasure speaking to you. And thank you so much for coming on the Inductive Economy.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Bye.